Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Jan, how are you this afternoon, or I guess this evening, your time?
It's evening. Good. Thanks, Ted. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about the conversation. We've been trying to get this scheduled for a while, so I'm glad we're actually making it happen. Why don't we get you introduced for the folks that don't know you? You've been around for quite some time. You're now at iManage. You were formerly at Raven. You were even all the way back in the autonomy days. But why don't you tell everybody about kind of your background and what you're up to today?
I guess if I go way back, then I studied as an engineer. So and specifically did AI at uni, and that's quite a while ago. I did. That was my second one. I did chip design, hardware design first. And then I moved into AI research with the steel company, and that's where I decided that I should probably leave steel behind. Still, I regret that. It was an amazing company to work for. And I joined Autonomy. So that's exactly, you're right there. So worked in enterprise search for quite a while. And then we decided with a couple of us to leave Autonomy behind and start Raven. So I was one of the co-founders of Raven and was CTO there for 7 years. We got acquired by iManage in 2017. And I stayed in engineering positions and now VP of product management, so still product positions for all my term at iManage. It's also been 7 years, by the way. And yeah, main mission has been to build out an AI team, bring AI to the cloud, and get it embedded into the products of the iManage portfolio. That's really been my role. Yeah, and I guess just to maybe like summarize it, I guess I've been wearing an engineering hat for most of my career. So as an engineer, I look at what is at our disposal in technology and what can we do with it. But also I've got this kind of science hat, right? And the science hat is more about where are we moving towards in the longer future? Where is this trending? And the time frames are slightly different. I think it's months and a couple of years for engineer, and it's more of many years for as a scientist that I look at things.
Interesting. Well, you were way ahead of the curve on AI. What was it that drove you in that direction, so early on when AI was still kind of somewhat niche?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's definitely pre all the connectionist model, as we call it, right? The connections is the neural network. So when I got into it, it was before that time. It was just this, the fact that on the one hand, intelligence and consciousness is something that really interests me a lot. Like, and the fact that it just emerges into this world, and then secondly, that there's this field of IT which is pursuing this, right? It's on the one hand trying to investigate and explain what our intelligence is all about and our reasoning process is all about. But on the other hand, it's also bringing these technologies then to the field of our practical applications, embedding it into products and making things happen with it. Like and this fact that you could make machines behave in a seemingly intelligent way is something that I always liked. That's why I picked up the study, and I've always stuck with it.
And when did you actually get involved into the field? Like what year?
So 2001, I think, is when I graduated. Yeah. So
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been a while.
Yeah. I mean, that was so Watson on Jeopardy was in the 90s, right?
Yeah. And we had the chess computer before. They were this deep search models, right, as you call it.
Yeah.
And then we had my specialty was support vector machines, which kind of went out of fashion as neural networks stepped in. And I worked on trying to do, for instance, corrosion detection, the type of corrosion on steel plates, because it was a steel company, right? And so we kind of had a guy who he evaluated steel plates by looking at it and said like, oh, it's 10% corroded by this type of corrosion. And then we built training sets and SVM to train on them and to completely make his job redundant. He liked it because he liked being made redundant for that task. That was not the joy of his day, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so I paid attention during those early years when I started my technology journey very early,
Mhm.
fifth grade. So this
Yeah.
would have been 1982. I got a Texas Instruments 99 4A personal computer, an extended basic cartridge, and a book about two
Yeah.
and a half inches thick that just had all the syntax of the different commands. And I mean, I was 10 years old and I was totally geeking out on this and building little programs. I remember I built an asteroid program where basically the asteroids didn't move. I wasn't that sophisticated, but you could navigate a little spaceship across the static asteroid field. But I was 10 years old, and then I got out of it in high school because chicks don't want to talk to computer guys.
Yeah.
So I stepped away and then found it again back after college when so many things had changed so much. But AI really kind of hit my radar. It was the AlphaGo.
Yeah.
Um, that was like the moment, like wow. But since then I've been ChatGPT and all these new capabilities. Like I'm spending a lot of time there, and and I'm finding a lot of amazing efficiencies. Like you saw the agenda that I put together for
Mhm.
us. That
Mhm.
was a output of we had a conversation on a planning call. I took the transcript, loaded into a custom Claude project with examples in its training materials and custom instructions. And that used to take me, I used to have to go back and listen to the recording again and take notes.
Yeah.
So it would be a 30 minutes on the call, then another 30 minutes at least to listen and get all the details. And now it takes me about 3 minutes.
So this, I mean, coming to this topic of the efficiencies, I actually went out and looked a little bit because, like, one of the things I've been fascinated about is how does like a knowledge industry like legal compare to other knowledge industries, for instance engineering, right? So how do they why is it then that engineers treat themselves to better tools sometimes than the legal workers, to make their life easier? So I started looking for data to back this up, specifically then in the AI land. So I found this study was done by GitHub, and it's on their own product, right? On Copilot, GitHub Copilot, which is probably not the thing you just take as a scientific research paper, right? Because it's on their own stuff. But they did say that when they rolled it out to an organization, that they have like 95% adoption on the same day by like so every user, like practically every user starts using it. And then they get to what does it actually help them with? And they claimed that it was a 55% time saved on coding tasks. But I don't know if that's actually backed by real data or it was the perception of the people. And one of the metrics I track is published by Meter. I don't know if you know Meter, but Meter just published a report a couple of days ago on how AI helps open source developers in their how it speeds them up and how much they think in advance it will speed them up, and then how much it actually did. What they found is that they think about they hope for 20%, 30% speed up, but they suffer from a 12% slowdown when using AI, which kind of really baffled me. That's very contradictory to what the Copilot people were saying. But maybe the most interesting one was that, and that one I believe is that from the IT developers who use the an AI assistant in coding, is that 90% felt more fulfilled in their job, and that's if anything else, that is something that I would be interested in, especially because TR did some survey, and they found that the number one thing that the legal workers want to improve is their work-life balance. So if fulfillment is something that can bring them and make them happier, then at least it's that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think it's been slower in the uptake in the legal world, but it's also not happening. Maybe 3 years ago, like definitely in the Raven days, we could claim like there's always this skepticism and lack of trust in AI, and I think that's with the ChatGPTs and the LLMs that has changed or is changing. It has already changed.
Yeah. Ethan Mollick talks a lot about kind of the jagged edge of AI in terms of capabilities. And, I noticed it. So my coding skills are largely out of date, other than
Mhm.
SQL. I was on the
Yeah.
SQL team at Microsoft many years ago, and SQL hasn't changed much.
Yeah. Sure.
So I'm able to still do some things in there, and I do from time to time, analyze data and whatnot. And I have noticed a very high degree of variation in
Mhm.
terms of, even from really good models like Claude,
Yeah.
on for coding. Like just yesterday, I downloaded a little freeware app called Auto Hotkey, and trying to be more efficient, and a common snippets I would, and
Mhm.
I had Claude write me a script, and dude, it took me like 5 times to iterate through it for it to get it right. The first time it did it on the previous version of Auto Hotkey, you didn't, and now the syntax is a little different.
Mhm.
Then it, I was basically having it control V, paste
Mhm.
into an app, and it would only paste part of the string, and then I had to ask it why, and then I basically had to put a little timer delay in there to get it to paste the full string before it terminated the thread, I guess. But then on other scenarios like SQL, if I have,
Mhm.
let's say, a little access database, I'll pull some data down if I don't want to mess with SQL, and I'll export the database schema into PDFs, upload it into an LLM, and ask it to write a query that will require me to go search for syntax, like a correlated subquery,
Mhm.
or something that I'm not doing frequently, and it usually nails it. So yeah, I think there's that jagged edge concept is real.
I mean, there's just, I mean, some of these shortcomings, let's say, are then picked on, and joked about. Like we had this, I don't know if you remember the strawberry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So why can't it tell me how many R's are there in the word strawberry? But then, if you actually dig deeper, is so what happens under the hood is the model never sees the word strawberry. It doesn't. What happens is there's a tokenizer, and the tokenizer splits the words into individual subparts, and then though each of those might be straw and berry, or bear and re, or something, or it might be just one token. You don't really know. But the key thing is that it then converts that into like a numerical vector, and that's really what the model reasons with. So for all it knows, it could be strawberry written in French, which is fraise. I mean, it would be the same vector it sees. So because it never has access to that something we see, which is the word, it couldn't answer that question. It could just probably just look in its memory of things it's seen that is close, and then just try to make an educated guess. So that there's explanations, and then once you know the explanation, you can work towards solving them as well, of course.
Yeah.
I guess I don't want to distract too much, but one that really fascinates me is the alignment problem. And alignment kind of comes down to these LLMs are really very rough gems. Like they're language prediction machines. They've seen a lot of text, like all the text essentially on the internet, and then what we give them is some input, and the model needs to complete whatever we've given them. But and the way that these big vendors make them do something that's actually valuable to them is by a second training step, this reinforcement learning, the one that actually AlphaGo, that's where AlphaGo became famous for that. So there's this two-phase training process. On the one hand, these LLMs consume all the text, and they have to predict the next word, just like the cell phone next word prediction thing works. But then secondly, to teach them about values, or um, the goals that they should achieve, they get this reinforcement they're learning, and the reinforcement is kind of like a carrot and a whip. Like when they get the right answer, then they get a carrot, and if they don't get the right answer, they get whipped by some human being. That's essentially what happens, right? And that's how they get shaped into making sure that they do something useful for us. And Anthropic has looked into that quite a bit. And what is really fascinating is that the bigger the model becomes, and I guess you could say the smarter it becomes, the harder it is to get them aligned with what we want them to do. They really try to uh, cheat us, right? That's
Deceive. They
They see
deceive.
exactly. They try. They talk very nice to us. They think like we're the best. That's And but more importantly, I guess more scientifically, is if you give them a coding test, they try to take shortcuts. They don't necessarily write a program that actually works. They try to write a program that satisfies the test conditions, which is not necessarily the same thing. And
Yeah.
that's where it gets really fascinating. You can see this human behavior slipping into them. And it will be a challenge to keep on, at least with this technology, to keep on making them useful for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned coding and like how the last time you and I spoke when we were getting prepared for this episode, we talked about how the kind of the contrasting approach between how legal professionals leverage or view AI and software engineers with tools like GitHub Copilot, and
Mhm.
there's kind of different mindsets, different approaches. What is your take on that?
I mean, there's definitely like a difference in adoption, but a difference of adoption that has been around for a while. I mean, the IT and software world can't be compared to the legal world. If you look at, I'll just bring up an example that I've mentioned in the past, just to illustrate how different these industries look at things, is the open source movement, right? So the open source movement was a big movement. I guess it goes back to the 60s or 70s. I don't know exactly when it started, where some universities and even individuals and companies decided that they would just throw all their intellectual property in the open and share it with everyone, with the belief that that would actually fast track the entire industry, and it would accelerate them rather than give all their most valuable assets away. That is something that's completely unthinkable as a business concept, I think, in the legal industry. While maybe it could also fast track or accelerate or fuel the industry, we don't really know how that would end. But there was definitely Microsoft was one of the big fighters against the open source movement because they thought it was going to like ruin everything. That has changed, of course. I just wanted to take that up as an example. So there's definitely a change in attitude, and maybe it's risk aversion, and probably with reason, like the output quality, the risks around data privacy, and being exposed as an individual, like that lawyer that used 2023, that New York lawyer that wrote the brief, and that I mean, no developer really, I think, has that same risk that they would get exposed in this way. Software gets written and gets double checked by machines, and of course, it has to function before it goes out. So there's more of a personality around there that matters. There's a different business model, of course, right? The billing. Then I'm talking about law firms, the billing by the hour model that definitely doesn't really encourage uh, the super efficiency, which is very different for uh, corporate legal. And we by the way, I think even within iManage, we see that with our customers, that there's a difference in attitude and uptake between corporate legal and law firms. Maybe it's as a personality trait. Maybe there's a knowledge gap. I think we've touched on the fact that there's definitely like an immediate return on investment mentality versus engineering firms where there's more of an R&D, right? True R&D, like let's set a budget aside and let some innovation brew in that budget. I mean, that's just engineering firms have to innovate that way to be able to be future proof. And I think that's a mentality not really baked into the legal industry, just because there was never a need for it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've written about this quite a bit. It's and that's due to a number of factors. I would say the most highly contributing factor in the legal industry to this,
Hmm.
how foreign R&D is, it's the partnership model.
Hmm.
So the partnership model is very much a partnership model that operates on a cash basis,
Yeah.
right? R&D expenses are accrued. Even if your tax treatment accelerates that for tax purposes
Mhm.
in general on your internal books, you amortize R&D costs over its useful life. And law firm partnerships are very much about maximizing profits at the end of
Yeah.
the year. And I think that's one of the big hurdles that law firms face when trying to map their strategy with respect to AI. There's going to be some experimentation and some R&D that's required, and focusing too much on immediate ROI, I think, is going to limit risk taking and ultimately hold firms back. I actually see it every day. We I've done business with about 110 AM law firms when I stopped
Mhm.
counting, and so I've seen a good cross sectional view. I talk to firms on a frequent basis where I hear things like, we're gonna wait and see because we really can't articulate an ROI today because
Yeah.
it's reducing the billable hour. I would say those firms are more and more starting to be in the minority. And
Yeah.
most firms now, especially the big ones, get that wait and see is a bad idea. But yeah, I think the partnership model is a big factor in this.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think there's change? Like, because we see ANO with Harvey, like that's definitely some kind of jump into like a big unknown. And for even in iManage, like we see for instance, the uptake of Ask iManage, which is our LLM based product. It's a it's the fastest uptake that we've seen for any of our products before. So, and that is firms who want to just don't miss out and want to experiment because they're not just buying us; they're trying different things and seeing what sticks. And there's quite some in-house initiatives and teams being spun up, at least probably in the larger law firms. That's happening. I would, by the way, definitely encourage that. So I'm on board with you. Like, encourage the in-house experiment, set some budget aside for it, and try different vendors, try software yourself, see what works, and don't just write it off. Like, figure out the constraints. That's really it, right? These products have certain constraints. Figure out what the constraints are, but figure out within those constraints what you can do with it. That would be my suggestion.
And it's hard to put in a spreadsheet, but
Mhm.
the R in the ROI, the return, is
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah.
It's and again, that's hard to quantify and put a figure on, but at the end of the day, if you're not thinking that way, you're going to it, you're going to limit risk taking, and it, you're not going to push forward at the pace at which you're going to need to keep up.
Yeah.
Um, in my opinion, what about, so you in the world of document management, I see a lot of document management systems. We don't implement. We're partners with iManage for integration purposes. So
Mhm.
in Infodash, we surface iManage content in intranet and extranet scenarios. But as a part of that, doing that work for the last almost 20 years, I've seen a lot of law firm DMSs,
Mhm.
and there's very poor data hygiene. There's been a lot of kind of mergers and acquisitions where you'll get one mess of a law firm's DMS that gets merged into another, and they have different types of shortcomings,
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, and it really seems like an overwhelming task for these law firms to actually straighten that up and get it to a place where it makes sense to point AI at a entire DM corpus.
Yeah.
Is that your take as well? I mean, it feels like you really need a curated data sets.
But I mean, you definitely taking a step back. You definitely need to do something about the information that you have, right? I mean, legal is an information business. It should be, I guess, obvious that managing and finding that information should be high on the priority list of what you invest in. That's a simple statement to make. And we definitely very often hear, like, can't we throw all those documents that you have in the DMS and put it in ChatGPT and then just get amazing results out of it? And that's, I mean, I hope they're finding out that that doesn't work, and everybody kind of, if you know the technology, that that's not really how it will work. So getting a good data set is definitely the strategy that as an engineer I'll put on my engineering hat is what you need to pursue right now, right? So the data that goes in is also the quality of the data that goes in is also the quality of the data that comes out. Now, the search technology has evolved quite a bit, so there's very interesting things that it can do. I mean, there's the AI has brought us the semantic representation. I mentioned that before, right? So the words don't get represented as strings anymore, but they get represented by a mathematical vector that represents the meaning. We call that these embeddings, the vector embeddings, and simply speaking, it makes sure that like force majeure or act of God, very different strings if you look at them, but they are very close to each other, or they exactly the same when you represent them in meaning space. So we've got this that has helped, but we really need that combined with the traditional filters, so we can have metadata filters. If you say the document should be, I'm looking for something that's written in the last 2 years, no meaning vector is going to help you there. So you need good metadata on it as well. And we kind of call that hybrid search, right? So this hybrid search is the joining of the semantic index, which is very interesting, together with the traditional search index. And Microsoft has benchmarked that that's the best approach. If you combine each one, if you compare each one individually, pure semantic or pure traditional, you get lower scores on finding the right information at the right time. Now, the information you put into it, still the information that will come out of it, right? So if you put in a document that you would never want anyone to use, it will come out. And if you don't have the right warnings on it, then that might, that might be very problematic. But by the way, just digging a little bit deeper on that search, because I kind of like search. They also found, and I wanted to give that to you, they also found that apart from hybrid search, semantic re-ranking also has another 10% uptake. Semantic re-ranking means that whatever comes back from the search engine, you pass it over again based on the question that the user has, and then change the order, right? So you take a look at the top 50 results, for instance, and you say, these results are all good, but this one is actually the one that should be on number one. I found that really interesting that it has another 10% uptake in their test. And there's technology beyond that, like graph rag, and we probably don't have time to go into there. But all of these technologies fit really well with legal. So legal industry should look into it. How I take it, how you can get to those the best information is you should let the system do as much of the heavy work as possible. So we found out that enriching the data, for instance, figuring out what doc type you're dealing with, what contract type or other legal contract type, is something machines can do reliably well. Pulling out key information points like what's the contract date, who are the parties, some other things that you typically would want to reference in your searches, try to pull it out and put it as metadata, because that's, and again, that's something that can be done by machines and can be done reliably well. It's not LLMs doing it, that would be too expensive, but it's doable. But then you kind of still need to find the gems in there, and those gems, so far that's still a human process to figure out, like, this is one of the, we've closed this deal, these are the gems that we want to keep, let's put a label on it, and once you've tagged it somehow, then the system can know that it should prefer those to come back. And that's our strategy: get the data as rich as possible, ensure that you use the AI as much as possible to enrich it. We also believe in bringing the AI to the data, right? So don't pull all the data out, so you lose all the security context, but bring the AI to it. It doesn't have to be iManage AI; it can be other vendors, and then bring all of the smarter search technology on top of it. But I've said that all of that, that's my engineering hat, right? If you think about the science hat, then I do have to say that every time that we've put anything, comparing to symbolic AI, I don't know if you know what symbolic AI is. We had this symbolic AI where you try to build rule sets for everything, right? So we had language translation 10 years, 15 years ago that was done by software with rules. Essentially, they wrote rules of how English should be translated into French, and somebody managed and maintained and curated all those rules. But then at some point, what we call the connectionist AI trained a model by looking at French and English texts and figuring out what those rules were, internalized into a model. And you can't really look at how it does it, but it does it when we do the benchmark. We see that it does it vastly superiorly well than the traditional rule-based one. And that's the same for grammar correction systems, code generation. I guess now we had code generations before, or transcription as well. These sound bytes were then translated or transcribed into words. So all of these technologies, we've seen that the symbolic version has been superseded by connectionist one. So I'm just saying, right now, as an engineer and a product manager, that's what we have to do. We have to really curate those sets. But 5 years from now, it could be very different. And I don't know what it will look like. Maybe it's the machine doing the curation for us, or it just doesn't need it anymore because it sees, as long as it has all the information to make the determination, it sees all of it. But there is a chance, of course, that the connectionist model overtakes it.
That's kind of the Elon Musk. Yeah, that's his theory as
I
well.
think I'm not as optimistic about timelines as Elon might be. That's and just the feasibility of it. You don't really know.
Yeah.
A very interesting benchmark. Like, I'm not a benchmark person, but a very interesting thing to track is, again, on Meter, is the duration of tasks as done by a human. The AI can do with high reliability. That's maybe a bit difficult sentence, but essentially means,
Yeah.
like,
Say that again.
so the how well an AI can do a task which takes a certain amount of minutes for a human to do, right? And they track how that's evolving. So let's say me doing a Google query and looking at the result, that's a task that takes me about 30 seconds, right? Replying to an email or writing a one class of code takes me about 4 minutes. So you could say these are increasingly more complex tasks. Some tasks take a human an hour to do, or take 4 hours to do. And what they do is they let a machine, or they benchmark how well an LLM or some AI performs at these tasks. So right now they got to the point that 6 to 10 minute tasks can be done with high success rate by LLMs, and that's been the length of that duration of the task has been doubling every 7 months. So every 7 months, so within 7 months, you could expect it to go to tasks that would take us 15 minutes, but then 7 months later, it's 30 minutes, right? And at some point, you kind of have quite an individual, or let's say autonomous, AI doing work. That so I mean, so it's a benchmark, and it's a forecast, and you can't trust forecast. But I think it's a very interesting one that we've been tracking, and that one I think will matter as to whether these uh, curation problems can be solved, or if complex legal tasks will be fixable, will be doable. I mean, by AIs. So I think that's one to keep an eye for.
So super interesting. What are your thoughts on how far we can get? And I don't know down what path, whether that's AGI or ASI or whatever's next after that, with the current kind of LLM transformer architecture. It seems to me like it's not going to, this isn't the end state. This is an intermediate state to whatever's next, and I have no idea what that might look like. But there are just some shortcomings with this particular approach that
Yeah.
we've managed to have really good workarounds. Like maybe a year ago, I would sit here and tell you that LLMs can't reason, that they
Mhm.
don't understand the question or the prompt that you put in there. And there's been a lot of workarounds, with inference time, compute, and that have worked around that well. I don't know that I could sit here and say that today because the output looks so convincing.
I know.
But
I know. I had the same thing. I had and they can reach out to tools, right? That's also something we've given them. There's an ability that they can call out to other tools. For instance, they were never very good at doing maths. Simple calculations couldn't be done. Probably also related to this entire representation problem. but they couldn't do it. And then now they could just reach out to a calculator and do the calculations and pull the results back and use it, right? So, all right, but that wasn't your problem, right? The problem is, can LLMs fundamentally do semantic reasoning tasks, right? That's kind of, and take that very far. I mean, I think that is one of the best best questions to ask, and also one of the hardest ones to answer. My mind is like, so I've always said no, it can't be done. Like it's a LLMs are curve fitting, so they've seen a lot of data on the internet, and they fit the curve on that. Like, so it is curve fitting is only as good as the data it has seen, and the only thing they can come up with is something that is somewhere on that curve. So they can't think out of that box.
Right.
And we as humans, I think, prove that we don't have to see. Well, just to go a bit further on that, like they might still amaze us every day if because they come up with an answer that amazes us that we wouldn't know, for instance, right? But if you would have seen all the data that they've seen, maybe that answer doesn't actually amaze you, right? So their answers are always interpolations. They can't come up with something novel.
Right.
And we seem to be, as humans, be able to come up with something novel. That's at least what it seems like. But we also have a much bigger brain capacity than the LLMs have. It's hard to estimate, but it's definitely more than a factor 1,000, maybe a factor 10,000 more complex that our brain is and the LLM brain is. But it could, but it seems sticking to my point is I don't think LLMs can fundamentally do reasoning indefinitely. They can pretend to do it with all the data they've seen, but they can't actually think outside of the box. Not until this curve fitting problem is solved. But that can be solved. There's other algorithms like genetic algorithms which do not have that constraint. So maybe a combination or change of the architectures, bring in some genetic evolution into it, genetic algorithms into it, or some other technology might bring us to that next level that we need. I think, I definitely think that this, and that's not a very original thing to say, but the, the worst LLMs or the worst AIs we've seen are the ones that we see today. They do evolve. I do think we'll need a scientific incremental step. It's not just going to be the same technology. We'll need a new step to really get to AGI. But that doesn't mean that's not useful with the state it is, right? So
Right.
we've all really realized, I think, that you can give it a document and it can summarize it really well, or answer questions on that document really well, or use snippets of it and then compose something new or compose an email. So there's definitely, within the constraints it has, there's definitely value we can get out of it.
Yeah. I think to take it to that next level, to start curing diseases and
Hmm.
really making breakthroughs in science, the ability to come up with novel concepts, you know, like you said, it can reassemble the existing Lego blocks it's been trained on to create
Hmm.
new structures of information. But in terms of something outside of that universe of things it's seen, like a mathematical proof, finding a novel approach. I was a math major undergrad, so and I struggled in advanced calculus with proofs. That was a very humbling experience for me. I'm great at the differential equations, matrix theory, all the stuff where you're solving equations, but
Hmm.
proofs require such a abstract lens and thinking that and I don't think LLMs are ever going to get there. It's that limitation is embedded in their design,
I
correct?
think that's correct. Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
By the way, a very I start to seem like the benchmark guy, but another interesting one. So there's all these bar exam benchmarks, but that's I mean, they test for a lot of knowledge that the LM might have seen right on the internet. There's Francois Cholet, and he's the person who started the Keras library, I think. So one of the AI programming, the libraries you would use if you would be writing a low-level AI code in Python. He was the original author of that product, and he's also very verbose about and explicit about the fact that he doesn't believe that the LLMs will take us there. And to prove it, he's created this ARC challenge. And the ARC contest is a benchmark, but with challenges that the LLM definitely hasn't seen, right? So they come up with challenges which are very abstract, visual challenges that as a human are super simple to solve. Like we do, we'll nail 99% of them without an issue. But the LLM score maybe 2-3% on the current ARC2 benchmark. So he thinks that that's a true benchmark for novel thinking, maybe for the path towards general intelligence. And that's also an interesting and definitely an interesting person to listen to and to interview if you would ever be able to get him on the podcast.
Yeah, no, that sounds super interesting. Yeah, I love getting detailed with this, and I've had guests on the show. In fact, I had a colleague of yours, a former colleague of yours, Jack Shepard,
Oh, yeah.
on the podcast, and we were talking about the legal reasoning question, or I'm sorry, not legal reasoning, just LLM's ability to reason and whether or not they truly comprehend. And his comment was, well, it doesn't really matter. And this is about a year ago, so this is before '03 and these reasoning models came on the scene. And my rebuttal to that was, well, I think it does matter in understanding these limitations, and because that helps influence how you apply the technology to a problem domain,
Mhm.
right? If you know that it truly can't reason and come up with novel ideas, you're going to be better equipped to deploy it in a way that's going to lead to success. So it's I think it is important for us to understand these limitations, and also from, I'm not a lawyer, but I've had many lawyers on this show, and they all consistently say that legal is a past looking discipline,
Mhm.
right? Everything, so it doesn't really have to come up with new. Now there are so when Marty Lipton came up with the poison pill concept in the 1980s as a mechanism to deter hostile takeovers. That was a new approach. Could an LLM piece that together? That's a good question. I don't know, because he used existing mechanisms to create, that probably would exist in an LLM's data set, training data. So could an LLM come up with a new poison pill
Yeah.
approach?
Well, it comes up with interesting ideas, right? That's so when you ask it, I mean, so fundamentally, I think it can't come up with a truly novel idea, and we've like the mathematical proof is the perfect example of where it actually completely falls through. It kind of depends a little bit on what it means to assemble something together and how much novelty there is truly in that poison pill. And I don't really know that well enough to, don't know all the prior examples to that to make um, a good prediction whether that's possible. But I mean, I guess another thing is if you come up with a complex problem and you want it to plan out what it should be doing, right? So we've got this agent technologies. It's not always great at making the plan and then following through on the plan, and definitely not good at seeing where its plan goes wrong. And I think that's part of this incapacity to truly grasp what's going on, right? So if it's more than just than string manipulation, which is going on, you kind of lose a certain meaning to it. Having said that, we've been proven over and over wrong, and we see more and more examples of more complex reasoning being done by LLMs, right? So, and it's interesting. This is all empirical, right? We contrary to the software algorithms that you wrote in BASIC, somebody could just go in and figure out what was that doing here, right? And see why it can't or can do it. And this is not the case for the LLMs. We really have to empirically test them as if they're a black box and see if, So even the greatest minds, the biggest experts, if you ask Jan LeCun or Hinton, they will have different opinions, and you would think these guys will probably just see it. They know the technology in and out, but it's not that simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And they all have wildly different
Oh yeah,
assessments. I mean, Jan is, I would say, the most bearish,
yeah,
uh, skeptical. I think he likes making press and press worthy statements,
yeah.
that AI is not as even as smart as a house cat. And, those things create headlines and that gets him attention. And I think he likes that. But I know we're almost out of time. I have a final question for you
Yeah.
though,
Go.
which I think is a really important one for our listeners. So we cater primarily to like knowledge management and innovation professionals in large law firms.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering where does the future lie in knowledge management, which is the discipline where you kind of curate and, identify and create and maintain repositories of model or precedent documents that are those examples. It kind of reminded me of what you talked about, the rules-based approach
Mm.
to language translation. And will we get to a place where the technology can do that? I don't. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on that slightly before, right? But I think we are not there at the moment. There's not even a forecast, like an outlook, that that's going to be the case. That you could just train a model and have that job handled. So I would say let's now be very realistic and know the current limitations. Same message, right? Find the applications that work. The knowledge industry can definitely benefit from AI. I mean, it's just undoubtedly right and probably still some discovery going on about what it can do and how far it can do it reliably, but it can do it right now. Now that outlook, that horizon, where we'll be moving towards, will it be possible? My personal hunch is that yes, it will be. Like I've seen too many examples of connectionist model connectionist model seeing the I guess the forest through the trees and figuring it out at some point at a level of complexity. I don't see why that wouldn't be the case. The hardest the the hardest thing will be to figure out what the timeline is for that and the complexity of the models and the cost associated to running them. Now, interestingly enough, we have I think an upper limit, right? Our brain is embedded in this physical world. It isn't computer. It's pretty cheap to run in terms of energy capacity. So there is definitely we should at some point achieve something that I mean that's the upper limit that we the upper limit that is a lower limit of the costs that we should achieve at some point. So I'm bullish on that being the case. I just don't know when.
Yeah.
If that's not too vague of an
Yeah,
answer.
no, I get it. And then, I'm very bullish on knowledge management's need, at least in the near to midterm. It's
Yeah,
it's more than ever. Like as we transition out of this billable hour model, which we're going to,
yeah,
we're going to go kicking and screaming, but uh, it will still play a role in how things get priced. But at the end of the day, I don't think customers are going to pay for time like they used to, given these new technology advancements. I think that puts knowledge management in a position where they can really drive bottom line performance.
oh yeah.
Um, and that's going to be really important to the
It's a, we'll,
business.
I think we'll see a lot of potential of automation that's driven by access to good knowledge assets, right? So you'll get great automation on starting from a knowledge asset, finding some additional inputs and getting to a close close to an output product, as long as you have a clear sight on what those good assets are. So I fully with you, right? Put the investment there now. Put the investment in finding the information, enriching them, searching the search technology to find them, and then I would say experiment with AI to see what automation you can drive on top of that in the actual legal flow, right? So
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us here today.
very glad I could be here. It was really good to
Yeah.
talk. Yeah,
Are you going to be at ILTACON this year?
I will not be at EltaCon. Sorry, I'm
Okay.
on holiday. I'm regret that now, but I'll find some opportunity to meet you, in real life, so we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jan. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.